Hello guys, welcome back to my EduSpace. Hope you all are doing and learning well. Last video we have discussed about the membrane proteins, that is integral and peripheral proteins, how they are so important in performing almost all the functions of the cell membrane. So in today's video, let's discuss about the cell membrane transport. So without further ado, let's get started. Before knowing the functions performed by cell membrane, we should know about the properties of cell membrane because characteristics reflects its function, and this will recall all what we have learned till date. Okay, so here are some properties of cell membrane. The cell membrane is 2 molecule thick and surrounds the entire cell. So we know the cell membrane is composed of 2 membranous structure. The inner one is inner membrane and the outer one is outer membrane. Cell membrane is made up of lipids, proteins and carbohydrates. It is made up of 2 layers of phospholipids, that is inner layer facing towards cytosol and the outer layer that is facing toward extracellular fluid. Okay, that's why it is known as phospholipid bilayer. The interaction involved, which are basically non-covalent, they are weaker than the covalent bonds. The membrane is in a state of constant lateral motion that serves it fluidity. It means as phospholipid molecules tends to move constantly at lateral side. We have discussed this, that this is the phospholipid molecule and it always tends to move laterally, either left side or either right side. So it performs sideways movement. That's why cell shows fluidity, or we can say cell membrane is fluid in nature. The embedded proteins makes the difference in its functions. It acts as enzymes, transporters and receptors. So as we know that cell membrane is semi-permeable in nature. Okay, the cell membrane is semi-permeable in nature. It allows only certain molecules to pass through it while block others. So what kind of molecules can only pass through it? It basically depends upon 2 factors. So the factors that determine molecules to pass across, it depends upon, the first one is size of the molecule and second one is the polarity or charge on the molecule. So size of the molecule. The molecule must be small enough. Okay, the molecule that is going to cross the cell membrane should be small in size to get past between other molecules that constitute the cell membrane. Large molecule find it difficult to squeeze out through a small spaces between the phospholipid or protein molecules. Suppose this is our cell membrane. Okay, the phospholipid molecules are arranged in this manner. So if a bigger molecule, suppose this is a bigger molecule, okay, it tries to cross the cell membrane, it could not, because there is not much space between these 2 phospholipid molecules. But on the other hand, if a small molecule having very small size, if it tries to cross it, it can easily cross through small spaces between the phospholipid or protein molecules. So the second factor is polarity or charge on molecule. Beside having small size, it should be non-polar to pass across the non-polar or hydrophobic core of cell membrane. So if the molecule is small size, it doesn't mean it can easily cross the cell membrane. It should be non-polar, means it should not have any kind of charge on it. Then only it can pass across the cell membrane. The polar molecules having high net charge is find it difficult to cross across the non-polar lipid core of cell membrane. Suppose this is our cell membrane. Okay, having the interior of the cell membrane is non-polar. Okay, non-polar core. So the cell membrane is having non-polar core. The molecule which are small molecule having non-polar like oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay, these two molecules are small in size and having no net charge on them, so they are soluble in lipid bilayer and therefore can readily cross the cell membrane. Whereas in case of H2O, we know water also diffuses out in the cell membrane. It is small, okay, it is small molecule, uncharged polar molecule. It can too diffuses through cell membrane. But larger uncharged polar molecules like glucose. The glucose molecule is having charge like water, but the size of the glucose molecule is much larger as compared to water. So it cannot pass through cell membrane. Okay, it cannot able to cross the hydrophobic core of cell membrane. Now, types of membrane transport. There are basically two ways a molecule can pass across a membrane, and the basic difference between these two ways are whether energy is used or not during transporting. So the two types of transport are passive transport and active transport. In passive transport, energy is not required. Okay, there is no requirement of energy, but in active transport the energy is required. There is a requirement of energy. Okay, so here in active transport energy is required, and in passive transport there is no energy requirement to cross the molecule across the cell membrane. So passive transport, this mechanism uses no energy and it's simply like diffusion of molecules down its electrochemical gradient. Whereas in active transport, this mechanism uses energy and molecule has to move against its electrochemical gradient. So if we take a look, suppose we have to throw a ball from high to low. Okay, this is higher region and this is lower region. We have to throw a ball from higher to lower. It does not require any kind of energy, so it is downhill movement, which is a kind of passive transport where We don't need any kind of energy source to cross the molecule or to throw the molecule and it reaches to the surface. But in opposite case, if we have to move this ball from lower to higher concentration, obviously we need some kind of energy. Like we have to throw a ball. So we are using this much energy to throw a ball and cross that much distance to move and to go on the top of the hill. So passive transport is basically downhill movement. Downhill movement where there is no requirement of energy to transport a molecule, whereas active transport is uphill movement. Okay, it's a uphill movement where we require energy to transport a molecule from lower to higher concentration. So the next one is electrochemical gradient. In both ways of transport, we are using the term electrochemical gradient. So let's discuss this term. So electrochemical gradient is the combination of two words. The electrical gradient, it reflects the charge on molecule. The electrical gradient reflects the charge, okay? The gradient of charge. And the chemical gradient, it reflects the chemical concentration. Basically, it reflects the concentration of chemical at particular region. So this is chemical concentration. So the first type is electrical gradient and the second one term is chemical gradient. If we combine these two terms, it becomes electrochemical gradient. Okay. So suppose we take a jar, okay, and we separate this jar with a semi-permeable membrane. This is semi-permeable membrane. It forms two columns, the column first and column second. Okay. Suppose we are going to understand the chemical concentration gradient. Okay. So suppose we have A molecules in column 1 and Z molecules in column 2. Both column having equal amount of molecules. As we know, molecules have tendency to move from high concentration to low concentration. So A molecule stands to move to column second and the column second molecules, that is Z molecule, stands to move to column 1. So after some times we will see the concentration of both molecules A and Z evens out in both columns. After some time you will see in the jar there are columns representing equal amount of molecules A and Z in column 1 and A and Z in column 2. Why this happens? Because through semi-permeable membrane, the A molecule from column A move to column 2 and Z molecules move from column 2 to column A to equilibrate the situation. So we can say A molecules move down its chemical gradient from high to low, means comes to column second. Just like that, Z molecules also move down its electrochemical gradient from column 2 to first until they equilibrate. Hope you all understand what is the meaning of chemical gradient. Now let's discuss about electrochemical. Now, what is electrochemical gradient? It is also same like that of chemical gradient, but here electric charge on molecules play an important role. Okay, suppose we have the same jar, okay, which is divided by a semi-permeable membrane. In this column 1, we have the same molecule A, but this time they are charged. Okay, suppose A molecules are having net positive charge. In column second, we have the same Z molecules having net negative charge on it. Both will try to move down their electrical gradient. Suppose this Z molecules try to come in column second and this A positive molecules try to come in column 2. Until what? Until they equilibrate the electric charges on both sides. So after some time, you will see that at both the column, the electric charges are equilibrates. First column, second column, and now this A column has equal amount of positive as well as negative charge. Okay, and this second column also have the equal amount of positive and negative charge. So this is chemical gradient. So in electrochemical gradient, the molecules try to move from higher concentration to lower concentration. Okay, now the membrane transport. So the first type of membrane transport is passive transport. Okay, it does not require energy in the form of ATP. ATP is also known as the energy currency of cell. It stands for adenosine triphosphate. It is simply a diffusion process where molecules move down to its electrochemical gradient. Means the molecule move from high electrochemical gradient to low electrochemical gradient. Okay, so it basically a type of downhill movement of molecules. It is also of two types, the simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Simple diffusion is simply diffusion process and facilitated diffusion. It's also a diffusion process, but it is helped or assisted by other molecule. Okay. Now, simple diffusion. It is also known as osmosis. Okay. It is also known as osmosis. It does not require energy or ATP. It is simply a diffusion process where molecules move down to its electrochemical gradient and do not require any integral proteins to assist in transporting, which is where in facilitated diffusion there is a requirement of integral protein to cross the molecule across the cell membrane. For instance, water molecule. It can easily diffuses from high concentration of water to lower concentration of water. Suppose this is our cell membrane, this is extracellular space, and this is cytosolic space. The water molecule present at the extracellular space is having higher concentration there. Okay, it's having higher concentration. It try to diffuse it from its higher concentration to lower concentration. At cytosolic, the concentration of water molecule is low, so it can easily diffuses through cell membrane. So this process is also known as osmosis. Basically, osmosis is a process by which a molecule tends to move from its high concentration to low concentration. So the next one is facilitated diffusion. It is also simple diffusion process, but in this case, the diffusion is performed with the help of some integral protein. That's why it is facilitated by other molecules is called facilitated diffusion. This type of diffusion occurs for the molecules which are larger in size and which cannot cross the phospholipid bilayer. So for their transporting, there are some integral proteins that help the molecules to pass through them. Suppose this is the integral protein, okay? Or we can say this is the carrier protein. It has the capacity of conformational changes and it try to change its conformation during transporting molecule. Suppose this is a glucose, okay? So this molecule get transported by this carrier protein. This is carrier protein. So after that there is a conformational changes and the molecule get crossed from extracellular to inside the cytosol. So this is also a diffusion process, but in this process proteins play an important role for transporting molecule. So it does not require any kind of energy or ATP because it is a diffusion process It actually a diffusion process, but it is facilitated by integral proteins, which acts as a transport channel to allow a molecule to pass through lipid bilayer. For instance, GLUT4, GLUT4, GLUT4. It is an integral protein known as glucose transporter. As we can see here, this protein, this integral protein is named as glucose transporter. And this one is extremely important in diabetes. It is found in fat cells and skeletal cells. Basically, what it does, it triggers insulin to it triggers insulin to GLUT4 insert in the cell membrane of fat and skeletal cell. So with insulin trigger, the GLUT4 integral proteins insert in the cell membrane of skeletal and fat cells and take up glucose molecule from the blood. Okay, so this is our glucose transporter. It get inserted in the cell membrane of fat cells and skeletal cells. Okay, now what it does? It basically take up the glucose molecules which are present in the blood to inside of the cell. As it is passive diffusion, so the amount of glucose taken by cell from blood depends upon how much sugar we consume. So more we consume, more sugar will get diffused into the cell. So in case of type 2 diabetes mellitus, in type 2 diabetic diabetes mellitus, cell do not able to respond to insulin. So with insulin trigger, there is no GLUT4 insert in the cell membrane of fat cells and skeletal cell, which ultimately leads to increase in blood sugar level. So in the cell membrane, if there is no insertion of this kind of GLUT4 transporter, then what happened? The sugar that we consume is ultimately present or retained at the bloodstream, which can induce heart disease or kidney failure because it rises the sugar level in blood. Now, active transport. It's a type of uphill movement where molecule has to move from lower concentration to higher concentration. For this, energy is required. So in this, molecule has to move from its lower concentration to higher concentration. Okay, so it has to move against its electrochemical gradient. So this mechanism uses energy and molecules have to move against its electrochemical gradient. Basically, it is also two types, the primary active transport and secondary active transport. The primary active transport, here molecule uses, it directly uses ATP to cross the membrane layer. So if only one molecule like this molecule using direct energy from ATP hydrolysis. ATP get hydrolyzed and become ADP. During this hydrolysis, the energy is produced which is used by this molecule to transport across the cell membrane against its electrochemical gradient. When only one molecule passes across the membrane with the hydrolysis of ATP, then it is known as Uniport, and the protein that is used to perform this active transport is known as Uniporter. Okay, in secondary active transport, these are two types of secondary active transport where more than one molecule transport across membrane. This is also known as co-transport because at the time more than one molecules can pass through proteins, in which one molecule moves against its electrochemical gradient, whereas the other molecules move down its electrochemical gradient. Or we can say one molecule assists the transport of another molecule. So in co-transport, if two molecules moves in the same direction like this, they are known as Symport, and the protein that perform this Symport transportation is known as Symporter. Just like that, if two molecules move in opposite direction, that is one inside the cell and one outside the cell, then this type of transport is known as Antipot, and the protein that involves such type of transportation is known as antiporter protein. So let's discuss primary active transport in some more detail. Okay, basically it directly uses ATP for a molecule to transport against its electrochemical gradient. It's a type of Uniport. In this, one substance or a molecule stands to move across the cell membrane but against its electrochemical gradient with the use of energy from ATP. Such type of transport is known as Uniport. For example, NAK pump, okay, sodium potassium pump, like this. You can see over here, this is the protein that involves in transportation of sodium and potassium ions. This protein this time acts as an enzyme that is known as sodium potassium ATPase, which uses the energy released from hydrolysis of ATP to pump 3 sodium ions out of the cell and 2 potassium ions into the cell. So you can see over here, we know sodium ions concentration is higher at extracellular space, whereas the concentration of potassium ion is higher in cytosol. Okay, so this pump transports sodium and potassium ions against its electrochemical gradient. This pump out 3 sodium ions out of the cell and 2 potassium ion inside the cell. So the next one is active transport, that is secondary type. So secondary active transport. Here more than one molecule can transport across the cell membrane at a time. Here one molecule moves against its electrochemical gradient, whereas other molecule moves down its electrochemical gradient. So in this, more than one molecules can pass across the cell membrane, in which one molecule has to move against its electrochemical gradient, whereas other molecule moves down its electrochemical gradient. Okay, so in this type, the energy is derived from secondarily energy that has been stored in the form of ionic concentration differences between the two sides of membrane. So what does it say? It says that the energy is not directly used by ATP, but it is derived secondarily from energy that has been stored in the form of ionic concentration differences between inside and outside of cell. So in this type of transport system, if the two molecules are coming at one direction, then it is known as Symport transport. Okay, the best example is SGLT2. It's a glucose transporter. It transports glucose inside the cell against the electrochemical gradient, okay, and thereby sodium molecules to move inside the cell down its electrochemical gradient. Such type of protein that allow transport of molecules at one direction is known as symporter. Now, the secondary active transport. Integral proteins that allow molecules to go in opposite direction are known as antiporters, and this type of transport is known as antiport transport of molecules. As we see later, in Symport, the two molecules transport in one direction, but in Antiport, the two molecules are moves in opposite direction. So this is Antiport, this is integral protein that functions in antiport transportation is known as antiporter. This is antiporter. So the best example of this antiport kind of transportation is seen in sodium calcium pump. Basically, in heart cell, there is an influx of calcium ion. As soon as the calcium ion inserted in the heart cell, it causes the heart cell to contract. Okay. Now, what this sodium calcium pump do? Basically, it pushes calcium out of the cell. As we know, due to the influx of cell, at the cytosol region, the calcium ion concentration is high. Okay? At this region, the calcium ion concentration is high. So this pump try to move the calcium ion against its electrochemical gradient to outside the cell. Parallelly, the sodium ion, okay, comes inside the cell, which is down its electrochemical gradient. So Na ion comes inside the cell because at extracellular space the concentration of sodium ion is high. So it comes from high concentration to lower concentration. As soon as the sodium ion comes inside the cell, the hard shell gets relaxed. Okay, this is secondary active transport mechanism. Thanks for watching.